Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and today we'll look at the safe way to cut slots on the router table. Some furniture and a lot of woodworking jigs require slots that go all the way through a workpiece, but they stop short of the edges or ends. You may not have a use for this technique in mind right this second, but eventually you're going to have to do it. And if you don't do it properly, you can ruin your workpiece, or worse yet, injure yourself. So I recommend you watch this entire short tutorial and then you file it away in your mind for when that time comes. You can cut slots with a handheld router, but I prefer to use the router table whenever I can, especially if the cut is near the edge or end of a workpiece so that I can back my fence far enough away from my router bit to make the cut. It's because I find that the router table fence is faster and more accurate than the edge guide I would need to use with a handheld router. But to make a stopped cut at the router table, there is a point in the cut where you won't see your bit, so you have to know exactly where it's going to be cutting. I use a square and a piece of tape to mark the location of both sides of the cutter on my fence. Now I'll be able to align the starting point of my cut, which I've marked on my workpiece, with the left side of the router bit, even though I can't see the bit itself as I lower my workpiece down on top of it. My router bit is long enough to cut all the way through the workpiece in one pass, but I only cut about halfway through on the first pass, starting with the line on the left side of the bit and then ending my cut when the line on my workpiece reaches the line for the right side of the bit. A shallow cut is just easier to control, but it's also easier to start because the higher the bit is set above the table, the more difficult it can be to align the two marks, the one on your workpiece with the one on the left side of the bit, as you lower the workpiece down on top of the bit to start the cut. For this reason, I rarely raise the bit more than a ½ inch above the table. I can always flip the workpiece over and cut the rest of the way through from the other side. Now here's our first safety concern. Out of fear of accidentally starting the cut past your layout line and making the slot too long, some people intentionally start their cut so the bit is a little bit to the right of their intended starting point. Then they try to back the workpiece up in a left to right motion to get their bit back to their starting point before going in the right to left motion as normal to cut the rest of their slot. You may reason that such a short backwards cut from left to right is easily controllable. And since the entire bit is buried in the wood throughout the cut, it's not technically a climb cut. So it's not going to quickly rip the workpiece right out of your hands as it would if you were cutting in the left to right motion on just the edge of your workpiece. But that doesn't mean it's a good idea. In the left to right direction, even a fully engaged bit will try to lever the workpiece away from your fence, and you're likely to end up with a crooked cut. And the natural reaction to that is to quickly try to shift the workpiece back towards the fence, which will slightly widen your slot enough that now only one side of the bit is engaged. Should the bit contact the wood with just its back side, it will create a climb cut and it could pull your fingers into the bit. You may think, oh come on, it's just such a shortcut, that's never going to happen, but it can happen and it's not worth the risk, so just don't do it. Frankly, absolute accuracy at the starting and stopping points of a slot, or even a stop date or a groove for that matter, is rarely needed. But if you absolutely must start your slot at a very precise spot, then consider stop blocks. If your router table fence is long enough, you can align your starting and stopping points with the tape lines and place stop blocks on each side of your fence to start and stop your workpiece. You can then lever the workpiece against the stop block on the right so it falls more accurately on top of the bit to start the cut, and the block on the left will help you stop the cut accurately there as well. By the way, a wooden screw clamp makes an excellent stop block. Another way to ensure accuracy without messing with tape and layout lines and stop blocks is to use a drill press to bore holes at your starting and stopping point on each end of the slot before you go to the router table. Use a drill bit that's slightly larger than the diameter of your router bit so that your router bit won't catch inside the hole when you slip the hole over it and turn the router on. This method works really well if your workpiece is so wide that stop blocks on the fence aren't an option. The downside though is you can sometimes see little bulbous ends on your slot that were created by that slightly larger drill bit. Finally, choose a router bit that's large enough to cut the full width of your slot. Don't try to widen the slot by moving your fence closer to the bit and taking a second pass. That will lead to a dangerous climb cutting situation and can pull your fingers into the bit if you don't do it properly. That's a technique that's just not for beginners. For more great tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker, check out Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. You can read and subscribe for free at stumpynubs.com.